After the ceremony, he didn't look for me. I watched him laugh with his friends, pose for photos in front of the ivy-covered archway, arms thrown around shoulders that had only known him a few years. He grinned at a girl with sleek black hair, who I assumed was his girlfriend, someone I'd never met. I stood off to the side, holding the small bouquet I'd bought from a vendor near the parking lot. The flowers were beginning to wilt. Or maybe it was just me seeing things for what they were. When I finally approached, gently, tapping his elbow and smiling like I used to when he was a child, opening birthday gifts, he turned quickly. His face froze for just a second before he rearranged it into a polite expression, not affection, not joy, just mild obligation. "Grandma," he said, and I waited for the warmth that never came. I stepped closer, still smiling, and whispered, "Can I take a picture with you, sweetheart?" That's when he leaned in, his voice so low only I could hear it. "Don't make a scene, Grandma, please." He didn't mean it to sting, but it did. God, it did. I stood there stunned as he turned back to the crowd. He didn't take the flowers, didn't ask how I got there. I had ridden the early bus. My knees ached from the stairs. I had brought a small thermos of his favorite tea, jasmine, and ginger wrapped in a scarf so it stayed warm. He never asked for it. I watched from a distance as his father, the man who vanished for years, wrapped an arm around him and laughed like they'd been close all along. The irony clanged in my chest. I had wiped his nose through flu seasons, sat up through nights of fever, sat in every parent-teacher meeting. But I was the one told not to make a scene. I didn't cry then. I stood straighter. When the crowds thinned and the families peeled away into their dinner plans and parties, I took the envelope out of my purse. It was thick, slightly creased from my grip. His name was written in my best cursive, the same handwriting I'd used when I helped him learn to spell in 2nd grade. I stepped forward, handed it to him, and said softly, "For you." He took it without looking, murmured thanks, eyes darting back to the girl beside him. I turned and walked away. The sidewalk stretched long and unfamiliar. The spring air was sweet, filled with blooming dogwood, but I felt nothing. In the envelope was the unpaid tuition bill. Not forged, not exaggerated, just facts. I'd always paid on time, always made sure the money was there. But this time, when the notice came, I paused. I looked at the zero balance in my checking account, the pantry with 1 can of lentils, the ache in my back that wouldn't go away. I looked at his silence, his absence, and I decided, not this time. Let the final bill tell its story. I reached the bus stop and sat. My hands trembled slightly as I opened my thermos. The tea was still warm. I sipped it in silence. 2 women sat beside me, talking about their sons, their pride, their worries, their hopes. I said nothing. I thought about the time he brought me a painted macaroni frame in kindergarten. It said, "Best Grandma," in shaky block letters. I'd kept it above my bed until the glue cracked and the macaroni flaked off. I left it there anyway. Now I imagined him opening the envelope later that night. I imagined the flicker in his expression, confusion maybe, then recognition. I hadn't made a scene, but I had made a decision. And sometimes that's the louder act. He was born on a Wednesday, the kind of spring day that can't decide between rain and sun. My daughter Emily was only 23 when she gave birth to him, still too young in my eyes, but determined in that fierce, bright way she had since she was little. She named him Caleb, said it meant wholehearted. At the time, I believed the name would become a prophecy, Emily died 2 years later. A truck on Highway 8. A driver who had fallen asleep at the wheel. No one could reach her husband. He'd already started drifting by, then hopping between construction jobs, drinking away what little grief he acknowledged. When they placed Caleb in my arms at the funeral, no one even had to ask. I took him home that night, and he never left. He was a quiet baby, but observant. Eyes like his mother's, amber hazel, always watching. He liked the sound of the washing machine and the feel of grass between his toes. I remember how he used to bring me sticks, little stones, anything shiny he found outside. He said they were gifts, as if I were someone to be worshipped. I stopped working full-time to raise him, took a part-time janitor job at the elementary school so I could be close. I'd mop the halls during lunch and then sneak into the back of the auditorium when he had music class. I remember the first time he played recorder, every note off key, but he looked so proud. Money was always tight. When the roof leaked, I patched it myself. When his shoes wore through, I cut cardboard inserts. I never told him. I wanted him to feel like the world was stable, like home was a soft landing place. When high school came, I sold my mother's gold bracelet, the one she left me when she passed, to buy him a laptop. I told him it was a gift from the PTA. He never asked twice. There were nights I skipped dinner so he could have seconds, times I walked instead of taking the bus so we could afford his test prep class. I kept a ledger of everything, not because I wanted payback, but because I liked to see how far we'd stretched, what little we had. It felt like magic. He got into a good college, a private one. I still remember opening the acceptance letter with him. He screamed. We cried. He said, "We did it, Grandma." And for a moment, it truly felt like we did. The financial aid package was decent, but there were always hidden costs, housing fees, book expenses, meal plans that didn't cover dinner on weekends. I picked up more hours, started baking for neighbors, banana bread, oatmeal cookies, to sell at the local market. Some months I made just enough to cover his meal card. Other months I paid late. I hated the thought of him going hungry. He sent fewer messages as time went on. I figured he was busy. It made sense, a young man finding his world. I didn't want to cling. I just texted once a week. Hope classes are good, or miss your smile. Sometimes he replied with an emoji. Sometimes nothing. The first Thanksgiving he missed, he told me he was staying back for a study group. The second, he didn't respond until the next day, saying he was sick. I still made the sweet potato casserole, left his portion in the fridge until it spoiled. I told myself all kinds of things, that he was growing, that independence meant silence, that boys weren't as expressive. I told myself love didn't have to look like thank you cards or long phone calls. I told myself these things because otherwise the truth would knock me flat, that maybe I'd raised a child who didn't see me anymore. Still, I held hope like a candle. And when graduation came, the final ceremony, the culmination of every late payment, every cold night, every quiet sacrifice, I believed deeply that he would see me, that maybe the silence had been a phase, that when he looked into the crowd and saw me in that old blue cardigan he used to sleep on as a baby, he would remember. Instead, he looked through me. And now I keep remembering all the things he never knew. How I once spent 2 hours outside a financial aid office just to convince them to let me enroll in the monthly payment plan. How I stood in the rain to buy used textbooks from another mother whose son had dropped out. How I practiced his scholarship interview questions with him for weeks, how I kissed the top of his head the night before he left for college and whispered, "Be brave, but be kind." I never wanted repayment. I never asked for a spotlight, but to be told not to make a scene, as if my very presence was shameful. That was the moment the stories I told myself could no longer hold. And so I let them fall. It started with small things. A missed call here, a text that went unread for 3 days, the photos he stopped sending. I remember once asking him to send me a picture of his dorm room. I wanted to see where he was living, to imagine him there, feel a little closer. He said he'd send one later. He never did. Later, when I visited the college town for a dentist appointment, a low-income clinic I'd waited months to get into, I brought along a care package, just homemade granola, his favorite green tea bags, and a sweater I'd found on sale. I didn't tell him I was coming. I thought I'd leave it at the dorm desk with a note. The student at the counter looked confused. "Caleb Anderson," she asked, glancing at the log. "He's off campus now." She didn't offer more. I walked back out with the bag still in my hands. That night I texted him, "Stop by to drop off some treats. Hope you're well." He replied 2 days later, "Thanks, Grandma. Busy week. Busy. Always busy." I noticed too that my framed photo, the one of us in front of the zoo when he was 10, both of us wearing matching rain ponchos, and laughing, was gone from his social media. Not archived. Deleted. I only found out because a friend from church asked why it wasn't in his family appreciation post. I didn't ask him about it. I just sat with the quiet ache. On Christmas break, he came home for 3 days. He spent most of it on video calls in the bedroom. The second night, I made his favorite soup, the spicy chicken one, with egg noodles and lime, but he said he'd already ordered takeout with friends. He left the bowl untouched. He didn't even say goodbye when he left. Just a quick, "See you later," shouted over his shoulder as he headed out the door with a duffel bag and a distracted wave. I washed the bowl. I turned off the porch light. There were signs. Of course there were signs. Like the time I asked him to help me move a box from the attic, and he sighed, not the playful kind, but the tired, burdened kind. Like helping me was a chore. Like I was a relic he had to manage. I told myself maybe he was tired from finals. Maybe his back hurt. I always found reasons not to take it personally. But love, I've learned, has a texture, a presence. You can feel when it leaves a room. And in my house, love had started to vanish in quiet ways, like a draft through a cracked window you can't quite locate. There was one afternoon I won't forget. I had gone to the grocery store for a few things and ran into his high school teacher, Mr. Donnelly. He asked how Caleb was doing. I said, "Oh, growing up so fast." He smiled, then said, "I saw him last month. He came back to speak to the seniors, gave a great little talk." I blinked. "Last month?" "Yeah. Didn't he stay with you?" I shook my head. "No," I said. "He must have stayed with friends." The conversation ended politely, but my chest tightened in a way I couldn't ignore. He had come back to our town and hadn't told me. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed and ran my fingers along the stitched initials on the quilt I'd made for him the summer before college. I had spent weeks choosing the fabric squares, from his old t-shirts, pieces of my old aprons, even one patch from his mother's favorite scarf. He hadn't brought it to school. Said he was worried it might get damaged. But now I wondered if he just didn't want to explain me. The world he was entering, internships, networking events, polished holiday parties. Maybe I didn't fit. I was the woman who packed him bento lunches with notes, who taught him how to iron a collar, who once walked to the principal's office with a bag of hand-sewn mittens to donate after the school lost funding. Maybe those things didn't shine under fluorescent office lights. Maybe I had been rewritten in his life story as a footnote, a shadow figure, someone he'd overcome. It was that realization, that slow creeping recognition, that broke something deeper than heartbreak. It broke identity. Because I hadn't just raised him, I'd wrapped my existence around his, and now I was being unwrapped. The letter came in April, a plain white envelope, no markings, except for the university's return address and the word urgent printed in red just below the window pane. I opened it at the kitchen table, with hands already beginning to tremble, sensing something before my eyes could confirm it. It was a final notice. Outstanding balance, due $3, $846.17. Payment required to release graduation documents. At first, I thought there must have been a mistake. I had tracked every payment, every deadline. I had called the bursar's office at least a dozen times over the years to make sure nothing slipped through. I even had a little notebook, blue leather corners, bent where I jotted down every confirmation code. I flipped through the pages. March, February, January. I had no record of the last installment. I hadn't received a reminder either. Strange. I called the number on the letter, waited through 2 minutes of hold music. When someone picked up, I explained who I was, Caleb's guardian, technically his grandmother, and asked gently if they could walk me through what was missing. The woman on the line was kind, but firm. There was a grant applied for the previous semester, she said, but it was later withdrawn. Withdrawn, I repeated, confused. Yes, the student opted to take the refund as a direct deposit. It was never applied to the outstanding tuition. My lips parted, but no words came. That's not allowed, is it? I asked, my voice thinner than I wanted. There's some flexibility with certain grants. Students are given access once disbursed. We can't control how it's spent. I hung up and sat still for a long time. A breeze stirred the curtain beside me, but I didn't feel it. I only heard a voice, his voice saying, "Don't worry about it, Grandma. I've got it covered." He had lied, or maybe not even lied, maybe just assumed I would catch it, that I would once again do what I had always done, pay quietly, tighten my own belt, and say nothing. Later that night, I called him. He didn't pick up. I waited a few hours, then tried again. On the third attempt, he answered. "Hey," he said, casual, like he was talking to a friend from the gym. "I got a letter from the university," I said. A pause. Then, "Yeah, there's a balance due." Another pause longer. "Oh," he said. "Yeah, I meant to tell you. I had to use that refund for some expenses." "What expenses?" He hesitated. "Stuff I needed. Rent, groceries, gas. Things have been tight." I waited. I could feel the silence growing heavy between us. "You told me it was all covered," I said more softly. "Now." "You said I didn't need to worry." "Grandma, I didn't think it was a big deal," he snapped. "You're always watching the mail like a hawk. I figured you'd catch it." The words hit like a slap. I figured you'd catch it. That's what I become, a net, a backstop, not a person with limits, with exhaustion, with a body aging faster than it should. Just someone who fixes things. "I don't have it this time," I said. "I can't." There was a long silence. "Well, I'll figure something out," he said quickly. "Just don't stress, okay?" He ended the call before I could respond. That night, I pulled out my ledger. I wrote down the amount in red ink. I drew a box around it. Then I went to my closet and took down the envelope where I kept emergency cash. It wasn't enough, not even close. I looked around my apartment. Nothing left to sell. The heirlooms were long gone. The silverware I'd inherited from my mother had been pawned 2 winters ago when the heater broke. There was nothing left but the truth that I had been invisible for some time now, not out of malice. No, Caleb was never cruel. He was just careless, thoughtless in the way people can become when they believe love is a utility, always there, endlessly renewable. But love that is never seen, never honored, eventually becomes something else. So I began collecting every email from the school, every receipt, every text. I made copies, stapled them, organized them in a folder, not to attack, not to threaten, just to remember, because I knew a moment was coming when I would need to hold my dignity with both hands and not flinch. Graduation day arrived with more clouds than sun, but the weather held. I ironed my blouse the night before and set my alarm for 5 a.m., just in case the buses ran late. It wasn't a fancy outfit, just a soft ivory shirt with pearl buttons and a navy skirt that brushed my ankles. I wore the brooch Emily gave me on her last birthday, a tiny silver forget-me-not. Caleb had once asked what the flower meant. I told him, it means don't disappear. It means remember. I packed a small tote bag, my wallet a thermos of ginger tea, the letter from the university, and one sealed envelope with Caleb's name written on the front in cursive. It was the same kind of envelope I used to tuck his lunch notes in when he was in grade school. You got this proud of you. Don't forget your smile. The difference was this one held no encouragement, just consequence. The ceremony was long. Dozens of names, speeches that blurred together, parents wiping tears, siblings cheering the scent of cut grass and new beginnings in the air. When Caleb's name was called, I stood, not to wave, not to make a spectacle, just to witness. His gown caught the light. He moved across the stage, quickly, smoothly, a small, confident smile on his face. He shook hands, took the photo, accepted the diploma folder, though I knew from the bursar's office that the actual degree would be withheld until the bill was paid. Still, he looked whole, complete, as if nothing were missing. I tried to feel proud. I really did. But pride is tricky when laced with erasure. After the recessional, I waited near the designated family area. I stood among balloons, roses, and laughter. I saw a few classmates spot Caleb and clap him on the back. I stepped forward, heart full of nerves, and touched his sleeve lightly. He turned eyes, scanning me quickly. Then he smiled the same polite smile I'd seen on politicians shaking hands in parking lots. Not the real one, not the toothy grin that used to spill from his face when I picked him up from school with warm cookies in the car. I reached into my bag, pulled out the small bouquet I'd bought from the stand near the shuttle stop, a mix of yellow daisies and baby's breath tied with a blue ribbon. Congratulations, I said. He took it, hesitated, then leaned in and whispered, Don't make a scene, Grandma. And just like that, the floor inside me fell away. I don't think he meant it cruelly. I think in his mind, he was protecting me, or maybe protecting himself, from awkwardness, from embarrassment, from whatever image he'd constructed of who he was supposed to be now. He didn't want to explain the old woman in hand-washed clothes with a face lined by labor and sacrifice. He didn't want to explain the grandmother who'd raised him while scrubbing school floors and stretching rice into 3-day meals. He didn't want to explain me, so I said nothing. I didn't argue. I didn't protest. I simply reached back into my bag and handed him the envelope. He glanced at it, confused. "What's this?" "Something you need to see," I said. Then I turned around and walked away. I don't remember much of the walk back. I remember the sound of gravel under my shoes, the way the trees swayed in the breeze. I remember a woman crying behind me, clutching her daughter, whispering prayers of thanks. I remember a little boy running up and down the campus lawn, his tassel flapping like a kite tail. But mostly I remember how light I felt. Not happy, not free, but lighter, as if I'd finally stopped dragging a weight that no longer belonged to me. The bus ride home was quiet. I took the window seat, watched the buildings turn into trees, then neighborhoods, then open stretches of land. I sipped my tea, now lukewarm. My hands didn't shake. When I got back to my apartment, I placed the tote bag on the kitchen chair, took off my shoes, turned on the radio just softly so the silence wouldn't echo. I sat down and opened the notebook one last time. $3.146.17, still unpaid, but no longer mine. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. My body still moved on a schedule from years of habit, early risings, for school lunches, for bus stops, for clocking in at cleaning jobs, long before most of the world opened their eyes. I stretched in bed, slowly listening to the quiet hum of the ceiling fan. No notifications, no buzzing phone, just the sound of my own breath, even in calm. I made tea and watched it steep in silence. The jasmine floated to the top, releasing that sweet, familiar scent. Caleb used to call it the soft tea. He always asked for it after bad dreams when he was little. I'd hold him close and stroke his hair until the trembling stopped. Sometimes I think I still do it. In dreams, reach for someone who's no longer there. I sat by the window and watched the light climb across the floor, pale and slow, like it wasn't in any rush. For the first time in years, I didn't check the calendar, didn't look for dates, appointments, due notices. My day was blank, and it felt like breath. I didn't hear from Caleb, not that day, not the next. A part of me had hoped he might call, maybe even open the envelope, read the statement, and realize what I'd done and what I hadn't. But silence settled in soft as dust, and I let it. Instead of waiting, I opened the cabinet above the sink and pulled out the tin of flour. I started mixing dough, not because anyone was coming over, but because I wanted the house to smell like something warm. I kneaded, slowly, rhythmically, the way I taught myself all those years ago when I couldn't afford store-bought bread. There's something sacred about making food only for yourself. It says, I am still worth care. While the dough rose, I cleaned the front closet, took down the drawings Caleb had made as a child, dragons' castles, one self-portrait with a crooked smile. I didn't throw them out, just tucked them into a box marked before. I think every life has a before box. The trick is knowing when to stop adding to it. I also took down the graduation photo Emily had framed before she died, hers, not his. She looked so young in that picture, eyes like hope mouth curled into pride. She would have been heartbroken to see this day, or maybe she wouldn't. Maybe she would have said what I'm only now beginning to believe, that love is not proven by how someone thanks you, but by how you survive when they don't. In the afternoon, I walked to the library. It had been years. The smell hit me immediately. Paper and polish, the scent of quiet. I signed up for a library card again. The girl at the desk smiled without asking my story. That was kindness I hadn't expected. I checked out a novel I'd always meant to read and a small book on seed gardening. I don't have a yard, but there's a windowsill. I thought maybe I'd try tomatoes. When I got home, I watered the plant in the kitchen window, the one Caleb gave me 3 years ago. A spider plant still hanging on still, pushing out thin green shoots in defiance of my inconsistent care. It had survived like me through drought and indifference. I made toast from the bread I baked that morning, spread it with butter, ate it slowly, and as night came, I lit the lamp beside my chair, opened the novel, and let someone else's story carry me forward. I didn't cry, not even once, not because there wasn't grief, oh, there was plenty of that, but because grief, once named and allowed to sit beside you, doesn't need to claw at your chest anymore. It just stays, quiet, like a guest who has earned their place. Before bed, I folded away the cardigan I wore to the graduation, washed it by hand, hung it to dry. I thought of calling him once, just once, to say something kind, to leave a soft end on a thread that had already frayed. But then I thought, maybe silence is the kindest answer. Maybe this was never about punishment. Maybe this was about ending the pattern of chasing, of rescuing, of explaining my worth. I turned off the light and I slept. The days that followed stretched quiet and wide like the sea before a storm that never comes. At first, I felt the urge to fill them, clean the baseboards, reorganize the pantry, reply to old letters I'd once set aside. But I didn't. I let the stillness stay like company I hadn't known I needed. Each morning, I brewed my tea, read a few chapters, and sat with the sun until it warmed the bones in my hands. I found a routine not based on anyone else's hunger or schedule. I started walking again, slowly to the park 2 blocks down. There's an old bench there, half swallowed by ivy, that no one else seems to use. I brought a cushion one day and made it mine. At first, I half expected Caleb to appear in my dreams, in a message, even just in my thoughts, trying to explain or to make it right. But he didn't. And slowly, the absence turned from a wound into a clean line, not healed, but closed. I thought about all the years I spent preempting disappointment, fixing things before they fell apart, softening truths so no one else had to hurt. I'd built a life on silence, thinking it was kindness, thinking that giving without boundaries was love. But now I could see what I hadn't then, that when you give without pause, you teach people to take without question. It wasn't that Caleb hated me. He didn't. He had simply learned over time and through my own silent encouragement that I would always be there, always say yes, always pay clean weight, forgive. He had learned that I required nothing, and so he gave me nothing. The realization didn't make me angry. It made me still. One afternoon, I received a call from the literacy center. I had signed up to volunteer on a whim, not expecting a response. But they were shorthanded and remembered my years in the school system. They asked if I could come in for an hour or two that week. I said yes. That Thursday, I walked into the building with my canvas bag and my blue notebook. The children were shy at first. Most of them just stared quiet and cautious. But by the end of the hour, one had asked if I could help her with a story she was writing about a cloud that lost its home. Another boy, maybe 7, slid a crumpled spelling test across the table and whispered, "Can you show me what I did wrong?" They didn't know my past, didn't know my losses. They just saw a woman who listened That was enough. Afterward, I sat in the small staff kitchen and drank a cup of coffee from a chipped mug. On the bulletin board was a note in big block letters, "We teach with hearts, not just books." I stared at that note for a long time. It's strange how easily we forget our own capacity. For years, I had believed my usefulness began and ended with Caleb, that all my energy, all my purpose had been tied to one boy, one story. But now I saw I had chapters left. Maybe not loud ones, maybe not celebrated, but still mine. That evening, I took out the envelope Caleb had given me years ago, the one that came with his first acceptance letter. The paper had yellowed slightly, but the joy in those lines still pulsed. "I got in, Grandma. I couldn't have done it without you." I folded it again this time, carefully, placed it inside a small wooden box where I now kept only the things that had been given freely. A hand-drawn bookmark from one of the kids at the center, a poem Emily wrote in high school, a photograph of my mother holding me as a baby. I closed the lid, not to bury the past, but to preserve it. A day later, I saw Caleb's name flash on my phone screen. I didn't answer, not out of punishment, but because I had nothing left to explain. The bill was his now, the silence mine. The voicemail came in the evening just as I was folding laundry. His voice was low, almost careful, like someone approaching a wild animal they weren't sure would bite. "Hi, Grandma. I got your envelope. I didn't mean for you to..." He stopped, exhaled. "I'll fix it. I'll figure something out. I just wanted you to know that I saw it. And I'm thinking about Amsterdam. Thinking Kian Stikros. I thinking pros about you." A pause, then softer. "Hope you're okay. I'll call again soon." He hung up. No apology, no anger either. Just that strange, weightless in-between where people wait to see who moves first. I didn't call back. Instead, I put away the towels, matching them into neat squares, stacked like I'd always done. Some habits, it seems, remain even when the heart reorganizes itself. It wasn't until later, lying in bed with the overhead fan humming quietly, that I let myself wonder what he meant by thinking about things. Was it guilt, regret, or simply an obligation surfacing after discomfort I didn't know? But what I did know, with a calmness that felt almost holy, was that I didn't need to interpret his words anymore. I didn't need to stretch myself thin, trying to meet him halfway through ambiguity. He would call again if he needed to. If he didn't, the world would still spin. My breath would still move through me. The sun would still rise behind the eastern hill and spill into my kitchen the way it always had. I think there's a strange kind of grace in realizing that. For so long, my days were built around expectation. When would he visit? Would he remember my birthday? Would he ask about my knees, my blood pressure, my garden? Would he tell me if he was hurting? Expectation, I've learned, is the heaviest bag to carry, so I set it down. The next morning, I picked up a notebook at the dollar store and started a new list, not of payments or sacrifices, not of things I owed or things I gave. This one was different. Page 1, I walked to the park and listened to the birds. I made lentil soup and added extra lemon. I taught a little girl named Zara how to sound out thunderstorm. I smiled at a dog that looked like it belonged in a painting. I didn't wait for the phone to ring. I wrote in that notebook every day, not as proof, not for legacy, just for me. Because the truth is, my life was never small. It was just folded into the lives of others. For so long, I forgot it had a shape of its own. And now, as I unfolded it, crease by crease, I began to see it clearly. On Friday, I baked a lemon loaf and brought it to the literacy center. The children devoured it. One boy licked his fingers and asked if I had a secret recipe. I laughed and told him the secret was using real butter and never rushing the baking time. He nodded, like I'd given him ancient wisdom, and maybe in a way I had. Later that evening, I passed the hallway where Caleb's photo used to hang. The wall was bare now, but not empty. In its place, I'd pinned up a drawing from one of the students, a bright sun with scribbled arms hugging the earth. Below it, a sentence written in thick black marker, "You help things grow." I stood there, staring at those words. Not you pay for things, not you fix things, not you are owed, but you help things grow. Simple, true. That's all I'd ever wanted to do. And now, maybe for the first time in years, I was doing it again, not as someone's grandmother or mother or safety net, but as myself, just me. The second call came 2 weeks later, mid-afternoon. I let it ring, let it go to voicemail like the last time, not because I didn't want to hear him, but because I was in the middle of something, helping a boy named Jordan sound out extraordinary. He struggled with the middle, kept wanting to say extraordinary. I told him both were right in a way, and he looked at me like I'd handed him the key to a secret door. When the session ended, I sat outside on the concrete steps and listened. "Hi, it's me again," Caleb began. "I just wanted to say I paid the balance. I got some help from a friend. It's covered now. You won't have to worry anymore." The silence that followed was longer this time. I didn't realize how much you'd done. Not really. I mean, I think I always knew, but it didn't hit me until I saw that number on the page. It was like all of it landed at once. The food, the school stuff, the everything. His voice cracked, just for a second. I don't know why I didn't see it before. I think I was trying to become someone, and maybe that meant pretending I didn't come from anywhere, but I did. I came from you. Another silence. I don't expect you to call back. I needed to say that. I needed to say thank you. I sat with that message for a long time. Then I stood up, walked 3 blocks to the little garden plot behind the church, and pulled weeds with my bare hands. I didn't wear gloves. I wanted to feel the dirt, the sting of nettles, the reality of something rooted. Gratitude is a beautiful thing, but it's not a cure. I didn't call back. Instead, that night I added a new entry to my notebook. Heard a thank you that didn't demand a reply. Touched the earth with bare fingers. Let myself feel pride without the ache of needing to be seen. I think I used to believe that closure came from conversations, from reckoning, from apologies delivered at just the right moment with just the right words. But sometimes closure is quiet. It's a door you close yourself gently, knowing full well it may never open again and being okay with that. On Sunday, I brought scones to the center. One of the older volunteers, a woman named Iris, with hair like a silver halo, asked me if I'd consider leading the Wednesday reading group for teens. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Of course I'm sure," she said. "They need someone who listens. You do that better than anyone I've seen." It was the first time in years that someone had seen something in me beyond what I gave. I said yes. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and looked out the window. The city glowed in soft pockets, porch lights, headlights the warm blur of late-night diners. Somewhere out there, Caleb was beginning again, building a life I would no longer orbit like a silent moon. And me, I was beginning too, but not from loss, from choice. I had spent decades trying to be indispensable. Now I was learning how to be free. The next morning, I bought a packet of tomato seeds, tiny things, barely bigger than a grain of rice. I planted them in a row of mismatched ceramic cups on my window ledge, watered them, turned them gently toward the light. I didn't know if they'd take, but that wasn't the point. The point was I had something growing again, and this time it was mine. A few days later, I saw the photo. Someone from church, Marjorie, always quick with updates and proud reposts, had shared a picture on social media of Caleb at what looked like a small alumni mixer. He stood in the middle of a group holding a drink, his arm draped casually around the shoulders of another graduate. His smile was broad-polished, his blazer crisp. A caption below it read, "So proud of these bright young professionals shaping tomorrow." I stared at it longer than I should have, not with bitterness, but with something quieter, like the ache of hearing a song you used to love, now barely familiar. He looked good. He looked like someone who belonged in that world. There was no trace of the boy who once cried because a paper snowflake he made in class got crumpled on the walk home. No sign of the teenager who begged me to sew his name into his backpack so no one would take it. That boy was gone. Or maybe just folded deep inside. I didn't like the photo, didn't comment. Just closed the app and placed the phone face down on the table. The truth is, there's nothing to say anymore. And that, I think, is what makes the peace stay. I used to believe that love meant always showing up, that silence was abandonment, that distance was a verdict. But now I see that some distance is preservation. I still keep his childhood drawings in a shoebox under the bed. I still smile when I remember the way he used to sing off-key, loud-free. But I no longer live for the possibility that he might come back with open arms full of realization. Because here's what they never tell you about healing. It doesn't depend on the return of the person who hurt you. It depends on the return of yourself. One morning, as I stood watering the small tomato shoots, now just starting to break through the soil, I realized I hadn't dreamed about him in over a week. That used to terrify me, forgetting, letting go, as if not carrying someone constantly meant you no longer loved them. But now I understand. Love changes form. Sometimes it stays as presence, sometimes as memory, and sometimes it becomes the space we give ourselves once we stop chasing proof. I began writing again, not letters, not ledgers, just thoughts, half poems really, little fragments I scribbled in the margins of library books or on receipts. The world does not shrink when someone leaves. It widens, quietly, like a door you didn't know was never locked. I shared one with Iris at the Literacy Center. She asked if I'd consider reading a few to the Wednesday group next time. I told her I might, but only if the kids didn't mind an old woman mumbling about tomato seeds in silence. She laughed. That's exactly what they need. Maybe that's exactly what I needed too. That week, I bought a small secondhand radio and tuned it to the classical station. In the evenings, I'd light a candle, sit by the window, and listen to Bach or Satie, or sometimes something I didn't know the name of at all. It didn't matter. What mattered was the stillness, and this soft, unnameable thing growing where grief used to live. I think in the end, we don't heal by moving on. We heal by standing still long enough to feel the ground beneath us, to realize it was always there, quietly holding us up, waiting for the moment we'd finally stop running. One day, Caleb might knock on my door again, or he might not. Either way, I'll still be here, making bread, growing tomatoes, reading stories aloud to children who need to know that someone sees them, because I see them. And after all these years, I see myself, too. There's a different kind of silence now, not the kind that once haunted my evenings, the silence of being forgotten, of waiting for a call that didn't come. No. This silence has shape breath, even warmth. It arrives with the sound of the kettle just before the boil, with the way light pools at my feet through the curtains in the late afternoon. It doesn't ache anymore. It simply is. I walk every morning now, not far, just through the 3 blocks between my building and the small park with the crooked fountain and the benches that always seem to remember who sat there last. I carry a thermos, a book, and sometimes a small plastic container of seed crackers to share with the crows that have gotten used to my presence. There's one that waits for me now, a glossy, bold thing with a white feather tucked into its tail like a flourish. I've named it Franklin. He caws impatiently when I'm late, pecks the pavement with theatrical disdain, but waits nonetheless. Sometimes I wonder if love can return in other forms, not reincarnation, but reincognition, a remembering of what devotion looks like, even if it wears new feathers. There are still moments when Caleb brushes through my thoughts, a scent on the wind, a boy's laugh, pitched just like his once was. I let those moments pass through me like clouds. I no longer grasp at them. I let them cast their shadows and then drift on. He sent a card a few weeks after that second voicemail, a simple thinking of you card with a note scribbled inside. Thanks for everything. I'm sorry I didn't see it then. I hope to visit soon. It wasn't signed, Love Caleb, just his name. I pinned it to the corkboard next to my calendar. Not for sentiment, just to remind myself that people remember you in whatever ways they are capable. Some offer bouquets, others offer receipts, and some just send a few words with a stamp and silence. He hasn't visited yet, and that's all right, because I no longer measure my worth by how urgently I am reached for. At the Literacy Center, Zara has started writing poems. She brings me folded sheets each Wednesday, all shaky lines and impossible metaphors. The sun has a secret, but the moon listens better. I read them with a seriousness that makes her eyes sparkle. She started sitting closer to me during breaks. I let her. Sometimes all a person needs is proximity to quietness. Iris asked if I'd consider training to become a mentor. I told her I didn't know if I had anything left to teach. She touched my hand and said, "You don't have to teach them facts. You teach them how to be still in their own skin." That night, I wrote that line down in my notebook. Be still in your own skin. I used to think dignity was something you had to defend, prove, carry like armor. Now I think it's something you uncover once all your masks fall off. It's what's left when you've stopped pretending to be someone worth more than you are or less than you were. One morning, while watering the tomato plants, now tall enough to tie to little wooden stakes, I caught myself humming. Just an old lullaby, something I used to sing to Emily when she had nightmares. I hadn't realized I remembered it. The tune came back like a friend returning after years apart, not asking for permission. Maybe that's what healing really is, the quiet return of things you thought had left you forever. When I think of Caleb now, I don't feel shame or anger or yearning. I feel softness. That's all. Like the way flour feels on your fingertips, before the dough takes shape, like a blanket left in the sun too long. Somewhere in another city, he is building his life, maybe with integrity, maybe not yet, but he is building, and I no longer need to supervise the construction. I did my part. I laid the foundation. Now I live in my own house, small, sunlit mine, and each day I walk through it, barefoot, unafraid. I think about legacy sometimes, not in the way obituaries write, it survived by devoted to remembered for. I think about it in smaller, slower ways, like whether Zara will remember the way I taught her to hold her pencil gently, not like a weapon, or if Jordan will someday tell his own child that reading The Snowy Day with me made winter feel a little less lonely. I no longer imagine my name etched into anything, not benches or plaques or even family trees. Names fade, photos yellow, people forget, but gestures, those stay. The kindness of a sandwich wrapped in wax paper on a day you thought no one noticed you hadn't eaten. The quiet of someone waiting until you're ready to speak. The small envelope placed in someone's hand, not to shame, but to remind. Those are the legacies I believe in now. On the last Friday of the month, the Literacy Center held a small appreciation gathering. Nothing elaborate, juice boxes, homemade cookies, 2 folding tables lined with wrinkled paper tablecloths. Still the children were proud. They each stood and read something, a sentence, a stanza, a brave stumble through a tricky paragraph. When Zara's turn came, she held up a crumpled paper heart. "This is for Miss Eliza," she said, her voice shaking, "because she makes me feel like I can be more." The room clapped. I didn't. I was too busy trying not to cry. I'd been called many things in my life, housekeeper, mother, burden, saint, but never that, never more. I took the paper heart home. I didn't tape it to the wall or frame it. I tucked it into the same wooden box where I kept Caleb's old letter and Emily's poem, not because it needed preserving, but because I did. That night, I lit the candle by my bedside and opened my notebook, was seen not for what I did, but for how I made someone feel. Ate a cookie I didn't bake myself. Laughed when a boy tried to rhyme banana with Santa. Felt no need to reach for my phone. There is a myth about women like me that when our usefulness fades, so do we. That once the children are raised, the bills paid, the roles performed, we become background characters in someone else's success story. But I'm not fading. I'm unfolding. There's a poem I found in a book of Rilke at the library. I copied it down onto an index card and taped it to the inside of my cupboard. Just the last lines. Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final. Sometimes I whisper it while stirring soup, like a prayer. I don't know what comes next. Maybe Caleb will call again. Maybe he won't. Maybe he'll marry someone I've never met and name a child after a concept instead of a person. Maybe he'll sit one day in a coffee shop staring at a receipt and remember me without knowing why. And maybe I'll feel it, not like a wound reopening, but like wind against the face, familiar gone before it's named. But I no longer live in the what-ifs. I live in the now, in the smell of tomatoes climbing toward ripeness, in the sound of pages turning beneath small fingers, in the warmth of a room that holds no debt. I don't need to be repaid. I needed to be released, and now I am. The tomatoes ripen faster than I expected. One morning I looked, and there they were, 3 small bursts of red, hanging low in the window light, like little promises kept. I picked them with both hands, careful not to bruise the skin, and set them gently in the blue ceramic bowl I'd saved for something special. I didn't rush to eat them. Instead, I made a small ceremony of it. I toasted a thick slice of bread, spread it with goat cheese, sprinkled a pinch of sea salt, and laid the slices on top like jewels. I sat at my little kitchen table, tea steaming beside me, and took one slow bite. And for a moment, it was everything, not just the taste, though it was sweet warm from the sun still carrying the faint tang of the soil. No, it was more than that. It was the realization that I had nurtured something from nothing, that I could still create joy without borrowing pain, that I didn't need permission to feel full. There was a time I would have saved that first harvest for Caleb, a time I would have taken a picture, sent a message. Look what we grew, but I didn't. Not because I was angry, because I didn't need to be seen, to be whole. I thought of all the meals I'd made for him over the years, the tiny rituals, the crusts cut off sandwiches, the apples peeled in spirals, the cups of tea on sick days. None of it had been wasted. It had simply moved through time in the way love does, quiet, unmeasured, offered freely. But it was mine now, the care, the labor, the attention. It returned to me not as validation, but as presence. I could still give. I just no longer had to empty myself to do it. That afternoon, I walked to the corner thrift shop. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, but the air conditioning was strong, and the radio played 80s soft rock that made the aisles feel like a small kind of dance floor. Near the back, among the mismatched kitchenware, I found a teacup, white porcelain rimmed with faded gold, a tiny chip at the lip like a small imperfection you only notice if you're trying to. It felt honest. I bought it for $1 and brought it home. That night, I made a pot of chamomile and poured it into the new old cup. I held it in both hands and watched the steam rise. I thought of Emily, how she once told me when Caleb was just 5, "He's going to be bigger than anything we've ever known, Mama." I can feel it. She wasn't wrong. She just didn't live long enough to see how bigness sometimes forgets its roots. But I remembered for her. I had remembered long enough. And now I was learning to remember myself. I pulled out the paper heart Zara had given me, smoothed its creases. I placed it on my table, next to the tomato bowl, under a small dish of sea salt, like an offering. Not to God, not to Caleb, not even to time, just to myself. In the kitchen drawer, I found an old photograph, me and Caleb, at the science fair years ago. He was holding a plastic volcano. I was wearing a raincoat inside because the gym roof had leaked, and I didn't want him to be the only one with wet shoulders. We were both laughing. I looked at it for a long while. Then I kissed it lightly, folded it, and tucked it into the wooden box with the rest of the before things. Not to forget, to protect. That night I wrote in my notebook, ate a tomato I grew myself, found a teacup with a story, thought of my daughter without crying, held my own hand in silence. Then I closed the cover, turned off the light, and let the dark come gently, not with fear, but with peace. A letter arrived at the end of August. Real mail, not a bill, not a flyer, not one of those generic envelopes stamped important with nothing inside but disappointment. This was handwritten. My name in his unmistakable block print, slightly slanted from years of writing too fast and thinking too slow. I stood in the doorway for a while, the letter in my hands, sunlight warming the top of my feet through the screen. I didn't open it right away. I made tea first, washed a dish, sat in the chair where the morning always seems to gather best. When I finally slit the envelope, I took a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Inside was one sheet of paper, no embellishment, no card, just a letter. Grandma, I don't know how to start this. Every time I try, it comes out wrong in my head. I've rewritten the first line 10 times, so I'll just say what I need to say. I'm sorry. I didn't see it. Not because it wasn't there, but because I didn't want to look. I think I was afraid that if I looked too closely at all, you'd done I'd feel small. I'd feel ashamed. And I did. I do. That day, the graduation, I thought I was protecting my image. I didn't realize I was erasing you to do it. When I whispered, "Don't make a scene," I made one in your heart instead. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for a lot. You raised me. You gave me more than I ever understood. And instead of honoring that, I treated it like oxygen invisible expected. I've paid the bill. That's not enough. It never will be. But it's a start. I know I can't walk back what I said. I can't take out the silence like a splinter and pretend it was never there. But I hope there's still a path forward, even if it's not the old one. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. Love, Caleb. I read it 3 times, not because I didn't understand it, but because part of me didn't trust it. And that part I've learned deserves compassion too. There was a time when I would have picked up the phone right then, called him, cried, opened the door to reunion like a wide porch light left on for too many years. But I didn't. I folded the letter, held it in my lap, not as proof, as presence. It was, something, not everything, not erasure of pain, not a reset, but something. I carried it to the kitchen and slipped it into the wooden box, not with the before things, but alongside Zara's heart and the tomato seed packet. The things that felt like mine now, not my past, my present. Later that afternoon, I sat on the park bench under the half shade of an old fig tree. Franklin came, flapping his wings, dramatically landing with his usual scold. "I know," I said. "Late again." He tilted his head. "I got a letter." He didn't respond, just took the piece of cracker from my palm and flew back to the branch above. Maybe forgiveness is like that, not given all at once, but pecked at slowly until what's hard becomes soft again. That night, I didn't write in my notebook. I didn't need to. Some days don't need recording. Some days they just need to be lived quietly without ceremony. I turned off the light and let the moon fall across the blanket. Outside, a wind stirred the tomatoes in the window. Inside, I slept. It rained the next morning. The kind of rain that comes without thunder, soft, steady, the kind that makes the world smell clean again. I opened the window just a little, let the sound drift in. The air was cool, gentle on my face. I stood there barefoot, fingers curled around a mug of tea, and felt something I hadn't in a long time. Stillness, not the kind born of fatigue or disappointment, the kind that settles in when you've stopped chasing, when your worth no longer depends on whether someone remembers your name on a holiday or includes you in their framed photos or speaks to you in tones reserved for things they deem sacred. I didn't need sacred anymore. I needed real. That morning, I pulled out a drawer full of old calendars, years of scribbled appointments, tuition due dates, grocery reminders, eggs, milk, Caleb's allergy meds. I flipped through them page by page. Some still smelled faintly of lemon from my cleaning rags. In one, from 2016, I'd drawn a little star next to the date of Caleb's midterms. Underneath, in my own script, call and remind him to sleep. That star, just one mark, in an ocean of lists, undid me more than any silence ever had. because that's what I had been for so long. A constellation of reminders, of quiet kindnesses no one witnessed, of invisible threads that held someone together even when they didn't realize they were unraveling. But I had cut those threads now, not out of cruelty, out of mercy. That same afternoon, I walked to the community garden with the extra tomato starters I'd been nurturing. The woman who ran the plots, Teresa, always cheerful, a bit loud, pointed to a corner spot with morning sun. "Yours if you want it," she said. I did. I knelt down in the damp earth fingers, pushing soil aside, easing each plant into place like they were precious things. And they were. Not because of what they'd yield, because of what they'd come from hands that had once been too busy, trembling, too worn from giving, now steady with intention. A little girl in pink rain boots watched me from across the path. She offered me her yellow plastic shovel. I thanked her and used it anyway, even though I didn't need it. Some gestures are about more than usefulness. Afterward, back home, I pulled the letter from Caleb out again. I didn't read it. I just held it. Forgiveness, I found, doesn't need words. It just needs a place to rest. In the evening, the power flickered once and came back. I lit a candle anyway. I liked the way it painted the room with movement, shadows shifting against the walls like memory present but softened. I made a small dinner, ate slowly. At one point, I looked toward the phone, not to check it, not to wait, just to notice it. And I smiled, because it didn't define the weight of the room anymore. That night, I lay in bed and traced the cracks on the ceiling with my eyes, same as I used to do when I was a girl in my parents' house, long before motherhood, widowhood, grandmotherhood. Just Eliza dreaming. And that, I think, was the greatest surprise of all, finding her again. The girl beneath the roles, the woman beneath the sacrifice, the soul that never stopped waiting to be claimed. I whispered to her, in the dark, "You did good. You can rest now." And she did. The tomatoes will be ready for harvest again soon. They're fuller, this time hanging heavy and low, like they know what they've survived to become. I check on them every morning, not out of need, but out of habit. The good kind, the kind you choose for yourself. The paper heart Zara made has begun to fade at the edges. I let it. Things fade, but they don't vanish. Not if you choose to carry them forward in quieter ways, in the way you greet the morning, in the way you fold a napkin, in the way you look at yourself in the mirror without flinching. I haven't spoken to Caleb again, not in words, but sometimes I feel the air shift, and I think maybe that's its own kind of conversation. He might come back, or he might not. Either way, I no longer mistake presence for love or absence for failure. Some treasures had been recovered. Others, more valuable, still had been discovered for the first time. It wasn't the ending I'd expected. It was better, harder, clearer, more honest. It was mine. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.